it's so funny because that is the thing that people will say, like, oh man, I don't have time because I got all this going on. So to think that someone had the flip perspective, like, no, actually, I just need to carve more time out for prayer.
This is the Prayer Culture Podcast. All right. Well, welcome back to the Prayer Culture Podcast. Today it's me, Michael, and
Patrick.
Jonathan.
Oh.
Not Patrick. Patrick bailed on us. Poor Patrick. He really would love to be on this one because he loves this topic, but he's not around today. So me and Jonathan got this covered. So
I'm kind of like a substitute teacher, you know. So you guys can all tune out. I'm saying
no, don't tune out.
No.
No, you're like the adjunct professor. You're like the guy who comes in and he's like a specialist, you know? He's got like this, you know.
Well, now you're setting expectations way too high.
Yeah, Jonathan is, I call you a specialist because, you know, you're a worship leader at like a real church, like a church that, you know,
a real church
has a number of people and stuff. You know, I'm just kidding. But he is a worship leader, and so thanks for coming on, bro. So, so we're continuing our series, basically prayer warriors from different movements and eras in history, and today we're going to be talking about the Reformers.
Yes,
the famous R word,
the fun
group. The Reformers. Is that what you call them? The fun group? The Hard A group is what I call them.
Fun as in, you know, we're just here for it to have a good time. You know?
Oh, man. So just a little summary recap for those of you who may not know a lot about the Reformation. The Reformation happened back in the 1500s, and basically the church had been just really powerful, really institutionalized, really politicized. And so it was used by people not to be in love with Jesus, not to honor God, but for power.
Yeah.
And for money and for all kinds of other things. And there were certain practices that were very much about growing the wealth of the church, the power of the church and everything, like the selling of indulgences, which was the church saying, hey, rich person, come buy this item from us and your dead relative will go to heaven for sure. You know, they won't be in hell because you bought this thing from me, you know, which is just egregiously unbiblical, egregiously against the sacrifice of Christ. And it's gross. And Martin Luther thought this as well. So there were some precursor people to Martin Luther.
Yeah.
So there was Wycliffe, John Wycliffe, right? Who was translating the Bible into English. At the time, the Bible was only in Latin, and
that was a time.
Yeah. That was a time. But nobody could read that except rich people and basically the nobility in the church, clergy. And so that gave the power to the rich people and the church, right?
Yeah.
And they wanted to keep it that way, but
almost
John
like
Wycliffe's
a secret knowledge kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
But John Wycliffe is like, no.
Yeah.
Everybody should be able to understand this. So he started translating the Bible in English. You also had John Huss. They were kind of some of the early stage reformers who were trying to change the narrative, and both of them were killed for their faith. But then along comes Martin Luther. And when Martin Luther came, he was a very black and white person. Not racially. I'm talking about like he was very like everything is right or wrong kind of person, but he had that conviction. And so he came up against the church, say selling of indulgences is wrong. It's not biblical.
Yeah.
A lot of this stuff you're doing to will power over people is wrong. It's not of the Bible. And so we need to get back to good theology. We need to get back to a theology of Bible, not of church.
Yeah.
Right? The church needs to submit to the Bible, not the Bible submit to the church.
It was this whole 1,000 Reasons thing that he posted on the door of the church.
Yeah, it's 95 Theses.
Or 95,
95 Theses.
I don't think
is
1,000
1,000?
Reasons.
That's a lot.
I don't think it was that much.
It's 10,000 Reasons, right? The song. But anyway, so Martin Luther posts this 95 Thesis, says, hey, here's my complaints. Now, the reason that it didn't work with some guys like Wycliffe and stuff initially
Mhm.
was because they didn't have the way to really mass produce the Bible in that language. But when Martin Luther was coming out his thing in Germany, you had another guy called Johannes Gutenberg
Yep.
who came out with the printing press at the
Mhm.
same time. And so Martin Luther was able to print the German Bible, and then you had other guys coming in starting to print the Bible in other languages that were common to the people. And that is when the Catholic Church and the Reformation, the Protestants, said, "Hey, it's time to split."
Yeah.
You know, so and this is very important to our day because when you see the difference between the Roman Catholic Church as opposed to Protestant denominations, um, you still see a difference in how we view authority, and how we view authority on truth and all those things.
Yeah.
And so basically, I just like to talk about the prayer lives of some of these guys that were really instrumental in the Reformation. John Wycliffe has always been a hero of mine.
Mhm.
I read about him very young, and I was like, man, John Wycliffe was just pressing forward, saying, man, no matter what it cost me, I'm going to make this Bible available in English so
Yeah.
people will not be abused and taught things that are not from God,
Yeah.
but they'll be able to read what God says to them for themselves.
Mhm.
Um, that's that's always really spoken to me, just him specifically.
And that makes a lot of sense for someone who's very evangelistically minded, such as yourself. We need to make it accessible to everybody. No, like seriously, like
Yeah,
that. I mean, it makes a lot of sense.
yeah. And so the funny thing, just a little bit more historical context, just so we totally understand.
Yeah.
Something else was going on at the same time, also called a Renaissance.
Yep.
And what this did was it was starting to put more power in the hands of the individual
Exactly.
and outside of just state authorities and family authorities and,
A lot of things were becoming decentralized.
yeah.
Actually, the Renaissance era is one of my favorite time periods to like actually talk about and study.
Yeah.
I used to do like Shakespeare and things like that, but really that was the big part of it is that you see a lot of these big institutions that were kind of holding the power in everything, like the arts and religion and culture and everything. And what ended up happening was is that actually everything on the peasant, I guess peasant level, on the lower levels, were then beginning to kind of rise up and take over because what would happen is that the people were like, okay, well, instead of us going to like the big higher ups for all these things, oh wait, we can actually do this stuff ourselves. And I think that allowed a lot of the culture and things that we see that came out of that to come to fruition
Yeah.
because people were being empowered as individuals. And it's so funny when we talk about the reformers and John Wycliffe and like all this stuff happening at the same time is that like most things, you know, the culture and the time was really more so indicative to what was going on in people's hearts as far as how the society was being built. And so it was only a matter of time before then it poured over into how people were doing church because once again that's a big part of people's
Well, here's
lives.
the funny thing.
Yeah.
If you look at it historically, actually, it was kind of flipped. The Reformation was part of the instrumental
Yeah.
piece that kind of lifted that Renaissance off. Like
Hmm.
it was part of it. It was like, oh, I can read my own Bible now.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
can
yeah.
think for myself.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um, and there's always bittersweet things with that.
Yeah.
There's a give
Hmm.
and take,
For
but
sure.
like the beauty of that was people started reading what God had to say to them.
Yeah.
And so when we look at the prayer lives of people in this movement, it was so key. It had to be, you had to have a really vibrant prayer life to be able to survive so much persecution and so
Yeah.
much like,
Yeah.
so much going against the institutions and powers that be, right?
I think that one common thing we'll see with any of these movements that we go over through the whole prayer series is the fact that the prayer life had to be strong because, as you said, these guys are facing persecution, and I think right now, as modern Americans, as modern American Christians, you know, it's not that we have it the easiest, but honestly, we it's pretty cushy here. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
So for people to be able to say like, "Oh, when they look at these guys and say, "Oh wow, these guys had incredible prayer lives." Well, of course they did, but also they had to. They like, and imagining where the church here would be if, honestly, this isn't me wishing wishing like terrible things on us here, but it's like there is a degree of intimacy that we can experience with the Lord really when we're suffering to a degree,
Sure.
you know?
Well, and
Yeah.
even what we have today,
Mhm.
when we're fearful about sharing our faith at school or at work
Yeah.
or whatever, the kinds of things that try to silence us, that's where it's like, okay, I want to be a bold witness. I want to share the light of Christ where I go. I want to be like those guys in my context. You're only going to do that if you have a vibrant prayer life.
Yeah.
And so, just to start out, like with Martin Luther, there's a really famous like saying about Martin Luther that he said, "I'm so busy in a day that I have to pray an extra hour." Or I think it was like he had to pray
Yeah.
3 hours a day because he was so busy.
Yeah.
Do we even think like that? Who thinks like that?
uh,
John, do you go, man, I've got all this stuff to do today. Let me pray for 3 hours.
nah, man, it's usually the opposite. It's usually the opposite, unfortunately, which is not good. But like that's the thing. Like it's so funny because that is the thing that people will say, like, "Oh man, I don't have time because I got all this going on." So to think that someone had the flip perspective, like, "No, actually, I just need to carve more time out for prayer because it's the importance of it." And really, that is the relationship we have with the Lord is what fuels us through all those things, right? I can see if you have the mindset of, okay, if everything that I'm doing is for the glory of the Lord, but then also I'm going through all these things that I know are going to cause me to be tested, what that does is there is a higher importance on making sure that you're as close to the Lord as possible. So, I mean, yeah, it's very valiant.
Yeah. So, like a close friend of Luther, he walked in on him praying before, and he said, "With what holy familiarity and holy reverence did Master Martin pray?" So, like, it would emanate off him,
Mm,
his passion for the Lord and his prayers. It wasn't just like,
yeah,
Lord, give us this day our daily bread, and then I'm done. you
yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah.
it was baked into him, right? So here's one thing that Martin Luther said. He prayed aloud even when he was alone
Mm.
on purpose. And so here's what he says about it. I always pray aloud for two reasons. I don't want my mind to wander because I'm praying to the God of heaven.
Yeah.
Okay, so it keeps his focus. And then he said, and two, I want the devil to hear what I'm praying because he is a defeated foe. I love that. That's so good.
Yeah.
Man. So, like, to me, that screams like praying with authority,
Yeah.
praying with
Confidence.
confidence, um, praying like the enemy is defeated,
Yeah.
like I
Mhm.
have victory over him, not like I'm always defeated.
Yeah.
Sometimes my temptation is, especially when I'm, maybe struggling with something, is to go, man, like, messed up again, or this is really hard, or life's really hard, or I'm depressed, or whatever,
Yeah.
to go to God with that kind of doom and gloom attitude. And we do want to come to God with authenticity. So it's not don't come to with authenticity, but ask the Lord to give you that like tenacity, like, hey, the enemy's defeated. Come
Yeah,
on, we're
yeah, yeah.
praying.
Yeah.
Enemy, you are defeated in the name of Jesus.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. It reminds me of there's this one song. So like how when you go to like a sporting event and like the student section will have like these chants. There's one chant was like, I believe that we will win. And then there was this guy, KB, he made a song called I Believe, and he sampled it. And the song it sounds super epic, but it's like that's the feeling like of praying in a way where you're like, no, like we've won.
We've won. Yeah.
Like Jesus has won and has achieved victory, and to pray in a confidence where you're like, no, like this is, you know,
As a reminder, the Prayer Culture Podcast is a ministry of two or more, which is a crowd-funded ministry. So if you enjoy this content, please check out our website and giving page listed in the description. Also, when you have a second, hit the like and subscribe button. Now, in terms of that first part, he said he prays aloud because he doesn't want to get distracted.
Yeah.
So, John, you've been distracted in prayer, I would guess, at times?
Actually, one of the things that I struggle with a lot is that my mind wanders a lot. So much so that in the normal day, like let's say that I'm downstairs and I have to get something from upstairs and I'm on my way upstairs. By the time I get upstairs, I'm like, what am I doing here? Why, what am I, you know, like that is a big thing that for me praying out loud is something that actually does help me a lot because
Yeah.
whenever I'm by myself and I'm trying to pray quietly, um, it is hard. I actually find it easier when I'm praying around other people and I'm talking out loud,
Yeah.
to focus. And so I totally level with what Martin Luther's saying. I mean, because to be able to have some kind of physical mechanism to keep you engaged, I mean, that is, and I mean, I think I even experienced that in worship. I mean, that's the whole thing with worship too,
Yeah.
is it's not just that you are, sitting there just thinking about it and like worshiping him in that way, but we sing aloud because it's engaging. It allows us to be focused on why we're here and what we're doing. So, yeah, being able to have something like that to keep you focused, yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, and I found coupling those two items Luther mentions, for me, when I'm especially combating sin, like where it's like I'm either tempted to sin or I've started talking to myself about, all the ways I would get back at this person
Yeah,
or,
yeah.
how, I'm so right and everybody else is so wrong,
Uh-huh.
when I start to do that and God's like, wait, stop. Pray. And when I start to pray out loud, when I proclaim things out loud, when I sing things, when I say things that I know are true from scripture, that I know are true about Jesus, it gets my mind on Jesus so powerfully to do that out loud. So
Yeah.
I totally resonate with this.
Well, no, it's almost in a way, it's also part of almost preaching to yourself because you're hearing yourself say these words. You know what I mean? So it is a way to be engaged to keep you focused, but also when you're hearing yourself say words to the Lord, then for you it kind of puts on like it's almost even more convicting, almost as you're praying because you're like, okay, Lord, like I trust you, and then you hear yourself say that and be like, oh, do I trust you? Yes, Lord, I trust you. You
Yeah.
know, and so, yeah.
So love it. John Knox was a Scottish reformer, and man, he was a live wire. Scottish and reformer. I mean, it's a lethal combination. But he was a guy who led many to the Lord, thousands of people, and I think tens of thousands of people. Like
Yeah.
so many people came to the Lord through John Knox. And it was said that he would pray for like 7 hours a day. 7 hours.
That's a work shift.
And it wasn't just, he had to get other stuff done in his day. So it's not like he didn't do anything else,
Yeah.
but he basically didn't sleep.
Yeah.
Like he'd pray at night for like 7 hours. And it was said
Yeah.
he had like 3,000 people in his like church or whatever. So he'd pray over each one individually
Wow.
every night is what is said about him. Imagine that.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Isn't that crazy?
It's dedication.
That is dedication. It's
Yeah.
like, Lord, give me a seventh of that. Just
Yeah,
give me-
yeah.
Yeah, man.
Even a seventh of that would be an hour.
It would be an hour, right? You picture that? Like, it's like, in my day, okay.
Yeah.
7 hours. Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, man. So, another one of our, reformed men, John Calvin, he defined
Oh,
prayer.
yeah. Mhm.
Okay. Here's how he defines prayer. He says, prayer is when I climb up into my Father's lap and whisper my needs, my praises, my confessions, and thanksgivings into his ear.
Mm.
How do you feel about that definition?
I mean, what I think it definitely brings home the intimacy of prayer. Because when you're talking about whispering, it's like when you're whispering to somebody, you got to get up close to them, in order for them to hear you. And I think that, y- w- w- what it illustrates to me visually, because just as a visual thinker, what it illustrates to me visually is somebody that Jesus is here and you're just leaning in on him, and you're taking him in, you know, because you're saying, okay, Lord, here are my needs, here are the things that I'm going, but then to then praise him and be like, Lord, like look at how good you are and look at about all the things that you're doing. Um, and I think it's amazing because I think as I think you guys have talked about before, um, to hear somebody like John Calvin talk about prayer in this way, I think for people that kind of follow him and think when you think about systematic theology, it's like, well, hey, look, this was the guy John Calvin
Yeah.
talking about the importance of prayer. So
Sure,
yeah,
and you think of him like as all head guy.
yeah,
Like he's got
exactly.
all this head knowledge of
But his
theology,
Devin is very emotional.
but he was very deep and
Yeah,
emotional with God, which is like, okay, that really encourages me. Like, hey, I'm not just reading somebody who only had a head thing,
yeah, hmm,
And it's kind of easy for us to put these guys in this kind of ethereal category where they're just
yeah,
like spouting out great theology and that's all there is to them.
yeah,
But they're humans. They were humans on the earth,
exactly. A person.
like us.
Yeah,
And, when he says, I kind of look at it this way, he's talking about the Father's lap, so that like closeness with God. I kind of picture it like I'm a kid, right? A
hmm,
little kid. And he says, climb up to my father's lap and whisper my needs. Okay. Daddy, um I need help getting on this stool.
yeah,
My praises. Daddy, I love you.
hmm,
You're awesome. You're so much fun to be around.
yeah,
My confessions. Daddy, I broke the vase,
yeah,
or I hit my
hmm,
my sibling.
yeah,
uh and Thanksgivings. Daddy, thank you for my birthday party. It was so much fun. Thank you for doing it.
yeah,
And just sharing those that in that intimate way, whispering this to your. Um, I love that. I just love it.
yeah,
It's like want my relationship with God to be like that.
yeah,
And I think that's a biblical concept for
hmm,
sure.
for sure.
Awesome. Well, that's just a bit about some of the reformers, their prayer life. Do you have anything you want to add?
I think that for me, when thinking about this particular movement, and especially when it comes to prayer, is that was almost, to tell you the honest truth, when we think about the reformers, Martin Luther, the Protestants breaking off from Catholicism, I think we should probably address how big it is to think that the individual person could have such an intimate relationship with the Lord directly. Because you got to think about Catholicism, it was kind of like you had to go through the
Mm,
priests and all that stuff.
yeah, your prayer was limited
Yeah.
by.
It was very much like, oh, you have to do this first and you have to see this person first and you have to go through these channels in order to, but to think that that was like a huge part of it was, well, no, we have a direct relationship with the Lord.
Yeah,
And so I think and that prayer is part of that. I mean,
yeah,
that is the thing. Um, so especially when he's talking about, like, he's giving his confessions to the Lord.
sure.
I mean, look, that's something that you do with the priest inside of the
Mm.
box. But he's like, no, I do that. I do that personally with him directly. That's a huge, huge part of it.
So for them, it was a revolutionary concept,
Yeah.
like something like we take it for granted now, but it's
Yeah.
like
Exactly.
back then. And I actually, when I talk to Catholics and they want to know, the Bible more, I always point them to Hebrews.
Yeah.
And the reason is the whole focus of Hebrews, even though it's talking about like Levitical priesthood,
Yeah.
if you read through it, there's so much similarity in kind of their structure. And I'm like, look at what it says about Jesus' priesthood.
Yeah. He is the high
He is the
priest.
direct high priest
Yeah.
for you to connect with.
Mm-hmm.
You connect to God the Father through Jesus
Yeah.
directly. And the reformers understood this. And so their prayer life was focused around this idea. It's not just for clergy, but every single person can read this word and have a direct communication with God. Every single person from peasant to king can know what God says to them through reading the Bible, and they can talk to God
Yeah.
and be directed by the Spirit. They're believers too, who can have the Spirit and have that communication. That is biblical.
Yeah.
And so we're just so thankful for our forefathers. Now, they weren't perfect.
No.
They had they were deeply flawed people.
Oh yeah.
And you can
Mhm.
see that come out in some things. I see this often where you have people who are very hardcore reformed people, okay?
Yeah.
A lot of what I'd call heretic hunters are hardcore reformed people, right?
Yeah.
And they look at revivals and movements in churches and they say, look at that person's flaws.
Yeah.
That was not a real move of God because look at that person's flaws.
Yeah.
Look at how the leaders went.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, well, I mean, if you read some of Martin Luther's later work, especially in terms of anti-Semitic language and stuff, it's
Yeah.
like he had some messed up stuff, and it's
Yeah.
because he was a deeply flawed person,
Yeah.
like we all are.
You could read scriptures and see how David got a man killed so that he could marry his wife. You know, you
Right.
could talk about how Moses killed a dude. It's like, dude, like God uses flawed, broken people to accomplish his will. And he does that not so that we can elevate these individuals, but so that he
Yeah.
can be elevated.
So he can be elevated.
You know, so that we
Exactly.
can see, look at how broken this person was and how good God created this thing out of it.
Yeah.
You know, so that's also a part of it. I think that
Sure.
their flaws could be wrapped in. I don't even think that it's something to even like avoid when talking about these people. It's like, no, actually, let their flaws be a testament to how great God is. He took this person that did all these things, that was capable of this, just like everybody is, and he was able to bring out this result. You know,
Yeah.
so
That's so good. Yeah, I love that perspective. It's about God. It's not about them.
yeah,
It's about God. It's not about us.
exactly.
You know, and that's not to say when leaders in Christian movements fall, it does have an immediate difficult impact. And it's
Exactly.
not good. It's not healthy for the church. It's
Yeah.
a very serious thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's about the move of God, and God can do his movement through, like you said, deeply flawed people. He can do it through King David. He can do it through Peter. He
Yeah.
can do it through Saul, who becomes
Yeah.
Paul.
Yeah.
He can do it through me, and he can do it through you,
Mm-hmm.
and he can do it through Martin Luther,
Yeah.
and Calvin, all those guys. And so we're deeply grateful to the Lord for bringing that about, so that we can have this
Yeah.
right here.
Exactly.
And we're deeply grateful to the Lord for that very reason. We said that deepness of prayer that's like about personal connection with God, and about more than just institutionalism and making God into some kind of, you know, political
Yeah.
power structure or
Yeah.
way to get rich quick or whatever.
Yeah.
So we're thankful to the Lord. We're thankful for the example in prayer. And yeah, well, we'll see you next time. As a reminder, the Prayer Culture Podcast is a ministry of Two or More, which is a crowd-funded ministry. So if you enjoy this content, please check out our website and giving page listed in the description. Also, when you have a second, hit the like and subscribe button.